My name is Stephanie Benedetto. Welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles as introduced by Sydney Banks to people throughout the world. And our very special, amazing guest today is Jacquie Forde. She's going to talk about how we all have blind spots. I loved the idea of this conversation because do I ever? Yes. And as I've said, that Jacquie has somehow sparked the playfulness in me even more seeing reading a bit about her before this. So let me tell you a little bit about her professionally. Jacquie Forde has been a leading coach, mentor, and facilitator in the personal and professional development field for well over 25 years, mentoring practitioners, delivering private one-on-one sessions, keynotes, programs, and events in the UK and globally. Her podcast and her 6-week online program, Becoming Unashamedly Human, have now been delivered to students all over the world. Jacquie loves to understand and witness how a simple misunderstanding of our human experience can be so easily rectified with love, humor, understanding, compassion, and deep listening, no matter what her client's gender, age, job title, or education. And Jacquie has graciously agreed to take questions and such. She's going to talk to us for a bit. If you have questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat or wait until Jacquie calls upon you to unmute yourself and let her know. So without further ado, Jacquie.
I feel I should be entering from stage left. You know, it's all very dramatic there.
We need
Steph.
theme music for you.
Thank you very much for that gorgeous intro and your absolutely beautiful energy. I love playfulness. I love just that feeling of being in life. So I am very grateful to 3PGC for giving me permission to speak this evening. Again, it's been a while since I've done one of these talks for various reasons. And first of all, I'm going to introduce you to the purple walls in my home. If any of you have seen me speak before, I always speak from a neutral palette. But we are 9 days into moving house, downsizing, and I haven't quite found a spot in the house where it is Zoom friendly for me to use. So I have this gorgeous purple background, which I hope will make you feel uplifted and spiritual. Apparently, it's a higher learning colour, so perhaps tonight we'll hear something new. It was either this view or packing boxes, and I decided this was probably a nicer camera view for all of you. So the reason I wanted to speak about blind spots is because for so long, being in this understanding, I've noticed that I get to see something new. I get to see something fresh. Yet there are still areas of my life and there are still areas of my clients' lives where they are not seeing what they want to see in order for them to change, in order for them to be able to move on in their life, that they're being held back inadvertently by not being able to see the principles in action. And what I wanted to do tonight was just to take you through a bit of my own story and then take you through what blind spots mean to me, what they mean in psychological terms, what they mean in spiritual terms, and give you a couple of client examples of where we've seen these blind spots and how we've got curious about them and what can hold us back and the results that these clients have had. And then I'd love to have a chat with you all just to see if you've seen something new and something fresh, or if you haven't, and you just want to, throw questions at me and we can talk and explore together. I'm open for all of it, which is fine. So I don't know if many of you know, but my story has always been I've been a perpetual seeker all of my life. All of my life, I've known that I thought too much. I could see my thoughts. I could see that my mind was busy. I could see that I listened to a lot of music. I tried to drown out those thoughts because I didn't know what to do with them. And some of them were loud and aggressive, and others were calming. But I spent most of my youth being what I would describe as shy. Nowadays, people would call that social anxiety, but in my day, way back in the 60s and 70s, I was just shy. I was scared to talk to people unless I'd had a few drinks. So I got through my life, being a nurse and being a midwife, and then I decided to change career paths and moved to work in the pharmaceutical industry, which I did for over 3 decades. And when I moved from being a nurse into being an exec in the pharmaceutical industry, I discovered that the voices in my head got louder, the thoughts got louder. And as the thoughts got louder, I started to turn towards self-help. I discovered the self-help section in all the bookshops. And when my kids were little, they were 6, 4 and 2, whenever we got lost in a bookshop, my husband would come to find them because he would be in the science fiction section, I would be in the self-help section, and the kids were in the kids section. And the kids at 6, 4 and 2, whenever my husband came looking for me, knew Mummy was in the self-help section, so they would tell my husband where to find me. I was there trying to fix myself and try to sort myself. And some of it worked, but most of it didn't. And all of it was effort. All of it was hard. I started to go down the route of NLP, and studying NLP and becoming an NLP practitioner helped, because I then knew what I could do with these thoughts. I could push them away, I could reframe them, I could minimize them, I could, throw them away. I learned how to play with the gift of thought. And it felt as though that was a relief, but again, that was exhausting for someone who, to be honest with you all, I'm neurodivergent. I have ADHD. And I only found that out because my kids have been diagnosed and we wondered where this came from. It's like, oops, it's me. So I've always had this barrage of thought that I've not known what to do with. So I trained to become an NLP practitioner. I studied hypnotherapy, all whilst working a full-time job. And I came across Richard Carlson in the early 80s. And I found his book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And I don't know if any of you have read his books, but Richard Carlson's books were actually an introduction to the principles, because Richard and his father had studied with Sid, but they didn't mention them in any of the books. So I'd had my first introduction to the principles way back in the early 80s, and gosh, that really, really helped. But it didn't quiet my mind as much as I needed it to. So I lived quite happily with my phobias and my fears and my anxieties. A very successful, healthy, functioning adult, very successful, but a high functioning, anxious person, a high functioning, depressed person. And I was still on the search. I still knew there was more. So this eternal spiritual seeking, trying to figure things out, continued. And then I found that Michael Neal and Paul McKenna were doing a weekend at Paul McKenna's house in London, and I signed up to do that. And on that weekend I heard Michael Neal say something, but I don't know what he said. I have no clue what he said, and I just felt tears falling from my eyes. There were only 6 of us in the room. And I asked Michael, we were talking about creativity, and I asked him to remind me what he said, and he wouldn't tell me, he wouldn't remind me. And I thought, oh, okay, no problem. So I went back the next day, and I'd woken up that morning and I had this kind of vision in my head of a white flag on the right side of my brain and a white flag on the left side of my brain, and all I could hear and feel was the word surrender. And again I asked Michael, what does this mean? And he said to me, I'm not going to tell you. You have to let that answer come to you. Now, at that point, there were expletives in my head about what I thought about Michael Neal, because this man would not tell me what I wanted to hear. And I'm so glad he didn't, because that was the point where I went on my final search. And my final search was to find out, who is this man Sid Banks? What is he saying? And is there anything for me to hear? And I did. And I'm so grateful, because coming across the principles took me from a space of searching to knowing. To knowing that this understanding is the foundational base of everything that we human beings get to experience in life. Absolutely everything. It hasn't stopped me being curious about other religions, about other spiritualities, about life, but it has stopped that deeper search, the unrest of trying to figure out, how the hell does life work? So I'm grateful beyond measure for this understanding. So when I came across this understanding, I had an absolute wish list of what I wanted to change, like we all do. But many things just changed by themselves. My relationships to people, to food, to others, to alcohol, to life just changed without me having to do anything about it. Phobias disappeared. I had the worst bee phobia ever. Since I was a little kid, my brothers would put bumblebees in jars, and he'd shake the jars and then let the bumblebees out, and the bumblebees would come and they would be angry, and I could hear them buzzing, and it was a fear that I developed as a very young child. So much so that I didn't want to sit in a garden. I didn't want flowers in my garden. I wouldn't go on picnics. And many a time being totally embarrassed walking along the road. If a bee or a wasp came anywhere near me, I would just throw away my bag and run down the road and just get away from it. And then one day I was sitting in my office at home, just working away, and I heard this buzzing noise by the window. And I turned round, and it was a bumblebee, a big, beautiful bumblebee. And that's the point where normally I would have got up from my desk, I would have left the room, and I would have waited the remaining 8 hours for my husband to come home to get rid of said bumblebee. I mean, bumblebee in a room would never have happened. And in this particular day, what happened was a lovely fresh thought appeared. That bumblebee's tired. Then another thought appeared. What do you feed a bumblebee that's tired? So I then Googled what you fed a bumblebee that was tired. I went downstairs and made the sugary water, brought it upstairs, put it on the windowsill, so close to the bumblebee we were almost kissing, and then went back to my desk and started to work again. Now, this is a phobia that had been with me for 40 years. This was a phobia that I had tried to get rid of with NLP, hypnotherapy, aversion therapy, you name it, I tried it. Yet, I did nothing, and it just disappeared. That's the gift of this understanding, that we can see something so deeply, we can have insight without content, and we find areas of our lives just change magically. Yet, there are other areas of our life where we try to change things, and it just doesn't work. We get in our own way. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that. That feeling that, yeah, I know the principles, yeah, I've got this. Bring it on, come on, bring it on. As though we're all some kind of god or goddess. You know, come on, give me what you've got, life. I can handle it, I know this understanding. And then all of a sudden, we're all in a tizzy because we haven't seen something deeply enough for it to change without us having a deeper insight, having a deeper understanding. And that's why you'll hear all of the teachers and everyone say, stay in the conversation. Keep listening. Because when we stay curious and we stay in the conversation, we get to hear something new. We get to have these incremental insights. But sometimes, as I've seen in my life and in other people's lives, we just need something a wee bit more. So there have been areas of my life where there has been change without me doing anything, and there are areas of my life where there has been no change and I've wanted change. And I've seen this, as I said earlier, in my clients' lives too. And I got really curious about it. I wanted to understand, why do we see some things so clearly, and why are there things that we just can't see yet? And now that's okay if you've got all the time in the world and what you can't see yet isn't bothering you that much. But when you have a client or a relative or someone in front of you who is incredibly upset, incredibly anxious, incredibly depressed, incredibly frustrated because they want to see something new and they can't see it yet. Sometimes sitting in a space of love and calmness is all they need, holding that space for them. But sometimes people need something a little bit more. And that is for you to help them go on a journey to make the invisible visible for them. And I'm going to explain that as we go through this talk. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about blind spots. Things we just can't see yet because they're so ingrained in our being, ingrained in our bodies, ingrained in our minds, that they're too close. It's like reading a book and you've got the book right up here. You can't see the words because it's too close. In psychology, there is a phrase called inattentional blindness. And inattentional blindness is where we're so focused on a certain thing that we can't see everything else. And there's a wonderful example of inattentional blindness. There was a study done years ago where they got people to watch a basketball game. And as the people were watching the basketball game, they said, keep the score, watch how many passes there are, see how many behind the back passes there are, see how many 3-point baskets there are. And so they got 100 people to do this, and the people were so focused on the activity of the game they failed to notice the brief appearance of a gorilla across the basketball court. That was a study looking at inattentional blindness. So over 50% of the people did not see the gorilla appear. And I got curious about that as well, in terms of what does that mean when we look at the principles? How does that show up? And the way that I've seen that show up in my clients and in myself is through egoic blindness. Egoic blindness. I know this understanding. Yes, I know how the principles work. And when we do that, we shut the door to curiosity. We shut the door to playfulness. We're not ready to see something new because we believe that we know this. And I have a client that came to me over 5 years ago, and she had what I call egoic blindness. She knew this understanding, and I thought, and that to me is always a red flag when somebody says, yes, I know the principles, I've studied the principles. I'm kind of like, okay, tell me what you know, tell me what you understand. And I'm looking for their blind spots. I'm looking for, whoa, they're way off the mark in thought, they're not quite understanding consciousness. And mind, they've just completely thrown that out the window, it just doesn't exist. So this particular client was a 52-year-old exec. She was a corporate executive, and she'd been studying the principles for about 10 years, and she had a weight problem. And she says, Jackie, I just can't lose weight. No matter what I do, I just can't lose weight. And I was like, okay, what have you done? And I think she'd been on every diet known to man, and she would lose weight, but then she would put it all back on again. So she knew how to lose weight, but she didn't know how to understand her mind properly. And this egoic blindness of believing that she knew what the principles were was stopping her from seeing something new. I don't know about you, but I love people's stories. I love their stories. I want to hear their stories. Because in those stories, I hear the misunderstanding of thought. I hear the misunderstanding of traumatic experiences. I hear the innocence of trauma. And in this particular woman, she had what I would describe as a fawn trauma, F-A-W-N. Fawn trauma is part of the fight, flight, freeze and fawn response. Fawn response is when people turn to people pleasing. It's the space where people feel shame. It's the space where people have learned that they're not important. And so all of their stories stem from that space. All of their misunderstandings of the principles and actions stem from that space of being a child or a young person going through a traumatic experience and not having the spiritual intelligence and not having the intellectual intelligence to understand what is happening to them at the time, because their grown-up was treating them in a particular way. When we started to look at the stories, it became very, very apparent that this woman was ignored by her mother, was put on a diet by her mother when she was a very young child, was treated quite unfairly compared to her siblings. And as a result of that, she created, through wisdom and through innocence, stories that kept her safe, stories that made her feel secure, so that she wouldn't feel hurt, so that she wouldn't feel shame. And what all of us do is we lay down these stories and our responses as memory, innocently, in our brains. So when we're in similar situations, what happens is our brain is very helpful and it pops up this information and says, oh, when you feel this, this is what you do. When you feel this, this is what you eat. Now, that's an old program. In this woman's case, this was a very old program that she had developed as a child, bearing in mind that our brains don't fully develop until we're 25. So she'd laid down all these memories of what she was to do and how she was to do it, and it wasn't conscious to her anymore. She had blind spots because she was working in a very, very unconscious manner, which most of us do, most of the time. So as we started to uncover the stories, she started to have insight. She started to see that the more conscious she could be to the feelings and to the stories, the more able she was not to follow the unconscious behaviour. And that woman lost 4 stone and has kept it off for over 5 years because she started to see what was going on. You know, Sid tells us in The Missing Link that the brain and the mind are 2 entirely different things. The mind is spiritual and the brain is a machine, it's physical. And it's not that we have to operate from one or the other, we need to understand both. We are both. We are philosophers and theosophers. We have to learn from direct experience, and we also learn from others. And when we're children, we blindly learn from others. And a lot of us don't question that as we get older. So the more aware and awake and conscious we can all become, the more we can see these old programs at play, the more that we can understand who's running the show, who's driving the bus here. And then we get to choose. We get to see and we get to choose. And understanding that we are not our psychology, that we are more than that, helps us get curious. And taking those few steps back, sitting with someone, just to listen to them, and not to dismiss their stories as, oh, it's all thought. Not to dismiss their experiences as, oh, it's just all thought. But to create a space where people are seen and are heard is such a beautiful, beautiful way to hear other people's misunderstandings, to hear how they innocently are using the gifts of mind, thought and consciousness to suffer, when these are gifts that should bring us joy. And as we all know, we're always living in the feeling of our thinking, so being able to identify a feeling, any feeling, as an invitation to relax, an invitation to see something new, an invitation to meet each thought with love and be curious about it, rather than suppressing or pushing away what we're feeling. It allows us to become, as I say, unashamedly human. It allows us to feel what we're meant to feel and just let it flow through us. And in that way, there may be the gift of insight. Because you're not pushing something away, there's no doing, you're allowing, surrendering. And it reminds me of how often we're in that state of anxiety or depression, again, that we innocently can reduce the potential to see something new because we're caught up in that thought cycle. I had another client recently. He's just retired. He's 67 and he's just retired. He was an employee in a bank. He had again an executive position in the bank, a very powerful position in the bank. And he was at home with his wife and he was not enjoying his retirement whatsoever. He said, retirement's meant to be a positive experience, Jacquie. Why am I not enjoying my retirement? And because he wasn't enjoying it, he was being grumpy and he was just being quite difficult to live with. And I asked him, what if the way you think about retirement is simply a construct? What if it's simply an idea? What if you had no thought about retirement? What would that look like? And then he started to see that he was making all of this up, the way he thought his life should be, how he thought it should work. He had a blind spot in not being able to notice in how having an idea of how you think something should work out can actually make you have a completely different experience of it. Have you ever felt you were really, really, really looking forward to doing something and it wasn't the way you thought it was going to turn out and you were upset? Have you ever wanted, my father used to do this all the time, he never wanted to go to family gatherings. He's quite the introvert. Oh, I don't want to go to family gatherings. And yet when he got there, he was the life and soul of the party and he loved them. But he didn't notice noticing how he was getting in his own way by creating a separate reality in the future for something that hadn't happened yet, and bringing it into the now, and then living his experience from that space. And we all do that. We all create experiences by moving along our perceived timeline of how we think time works, instead of the expression of the now as it is, as it happens, as it unfolds. We'll time travel to the future, we'll time travel to the past, and then back to the now in a heartbeat, and not even see that that's what we're doing. That in itself is a very, very common blind spot for people. And they'll base their human experience on that, creating drama, creating sorrow, creating suffering. So when David saw what he was doing with his experience, he was trying to live in a box of, this is meant to be fun, I'm meant to be having a positive experience. But the background noise in his mind of his thoughts and his feelings, as we do, we all live in the feeling of our thinking. He was telling himself all the time, this isn't fun, I'm not enjoying this. And his ego, his idea of self, was telling him he wasn't important anymore. He didn't get to dress up and put his suit on and go to the bank. He was a nothing now, because he didn't have a big job, and he didn't have the big salary, and he didn't have the big company car. So he was basing his experience of his retirement on that old egoic self-identification of who he thought he was. So we all have blind spots. And my invitation for all of you is to become more aware, more awake, to look at how you sleep, to look at how you eat, to look at, are you hydrated? To look after yourself, mind, body and soul, so that you too can have the best opportunity to noticing how you are experiencing life through these gorgeous gifts of mind, thought and consciousness in each and every moment. To play with it, to laugh at it, to not get too serious about it, to see it for what it is. A gorgeous, imperfect human existence that teaches us moment to moment to moment. I think as women, we probably go through so many opportunities to wake up, especially during the transitions in our life. The transitions where we go from being single to being married, from being married to having children, to having children, to losing a parent or parents. Many women class themselves as orphans at that point, to going through menopause. There are so many transitions and so many opportunities to see something new and something fresh, and to be gentle and graceful with ourselves as we go through them, and to noticing the ideas and stories and concepts that we hold, whether we're aware of them or not. Really, the answer's in the feeling. If it feels uncomfortable, there's a message in there. There's something for you to see, something for you to learn, something fresh. And I know men go through transitions too. I'm not denying your human transitions. I just see this more in my clients, my female clients. So blind spots, we all have them. The trick is to make them visible as much as possible, because the more that we see them, the more we get an opportunity to learn something new. Stephanie, I'd love to open this up just to see if anyone has any questions or anything they want to share.
Yeah, so I think we are a small enough group that you can simply unmute yourself and ask a question to Jacquie. And if you prefer to go the formal route, you can of course raise your digital hand by going down to the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and then raising your hand from there, and then I can call upon you.
I love when everybody gets shy. What stories are you telling yourselves? Even just to share something that you've heard, or if you know, I saw a couple of you nod your head about the story about the unintentional blindness. You know, about the gorilla story. That blew my mind. You know, because I'd watched that video years ago and never saw it until somebody pointed it out to me, because I was so hyper focused on watching the basketball game. And I can see myself and my clients do this as well with, they're looking for the principles in action. That they're looking, is it thought? Is it mind? Is it consciousness? What is it? And they're so focused on looking at that they miss the bigger insight, the bigger truth. Yay! I was going to call on you, Eric.
Beat you to it. Well, thank you, Jacquie, so much. And I just want to advocate for the silence as a way of letting you know that our presence and our listening and our thoughts just being very clear without the need of anything to say or share, it's an indication that we're very present with you and what you said. And we could feel it through the Zoom. And as you were saying about the invisible gorilla, that our programming is very repetitive and impactful as we grow up and go through life. And maybe you could speak a little bit about this, and what's coming to mind is how some therapeutic modalities do an inventory, a very thorough inventory. And while in the 3P there may be moments when we look at the past, but it's different. It's distinctly different. It's seeing something that wasn't seen before, and it's not to go back to, say, validating our condition, if you will. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Thank you, Eric, and I completely agree with you about the silence. I'm just a bit naughty, and I just like to get people moving with me and taking advantage. So yes, I feel what you were saying. I love your question, and I love what you said about other modalities. It's going back into the past. For me, it's about going into the past to understand the person that's in front of me now. What has shaped the way that they think? Where in the timeline of their existence have there been events that have happened to them where they have used the gifts of mind, thought and consciousness in a way that brings them suffering? and showing them that whatever happened then, however they translated that experience, was done from a space of wisdom and a space of love for their being at that point. So if something happened at the age of 10, you're now seeing the world as a 35-year-old through the lenses of a 10-year-old child. Is there room to see something new and something fresh? Because your understanding of how your experience was being created was mapped out at that young age in that particular way. And now you know differently how you create your experience. There's an opportunity to see innocence, there's an opportunity to see love, there's an opportunity to see wisdom, and there's an opportunity for allowing whatever's to happen next to happen. And I never know what that is. It might be forgiveness, it might be laughter, it might be tears, I don't know. But if, as practitioners or human beings, more than anything, having that space and creating that space for someone to see that all throughout our life we have been innocently conditioned by the media, by our schooling, by our friends, by our parents, by the magazines that we bought, by the clubs that we were in, by our coaches in all sorts of sports teams, by our peer group, all of it. Yet we don't think of that as conditioning because it's so invisible. It was just how I am. It's like, well, no. Who are you? You're nothing. We're all nothing. We're nothing. We come into this world as a blank slate. Nothing. I used to be a midwife. A baby is born from its mother. There's nothing. And within a couple of minutes, that baby has a health number. It'll have a national insurance number, within God knows how much long. The parents will name it. They'll decide what gender it is. And it's like boom, 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 boom. And all of these are kind of like, they're like little pockets of identity that grow and grow and grow and grow. And we base our decisions on these pockets of identity. We base our living from these pockets of identity. And then we live a life that is not perhaps who we really are. We're wearing these masks because we think this is who we're meant to be, rather than who we are at our core. Because we're living a life of expectation, born of others, or born of the old stories that we have of ourselves. Does that answer that, Eric?
Oh, absolutely, and thoroughly, and I appreciate it. It really goes to the heart of the matter of exploring for understanding's sake, and for recognizing that we are something deeper. This blank slate has depth,
Yes.
invisible depth that, and then probably more than I do, and it must be an honor to be around such many newborns, and I could just feel that honor through you, and you can see that process of, at the very beginning, the very inception into this world, we get the stuff.
Absolutely, the barcodes start getting slapped on us, this is who you are, this is what you'll do. I actually was listening to, it was a podcast with Brene Brown on it today, and the guy who was interviewing her said that he was this like 6'5" Caucasian American, and all his brothers and sisters said to him, you'll be the jock, You'll be the, you'll go to this college, this is how you'll live your life, this is what you'll do. And he said at an early age, he knew he didn't want to do what other people told him to do. So he did the opposite. He joined the glee club. He joined, he did all the things that people wouldn't expect of him. Because there's this societal sort of stereotypical view of, you look this way, so you must be this. And it's getting beneath that and recognising in ourselves and in other people how often we make these judgments. I mean, that's been a huge one for me. I get very judgmental when I'm tired. So much so that my husband, if he hears me getting judgmental, will say, honey, you're tired. And that's my cue. It's like, right, you're right. I am being a real judgmental cow here. This needs to stop. And I can have these thoughts, but they don't have to have me. I don't need to believe I am a certain type of person because that kind of thought goes through my head. So if I can feel that way about something that can be seen as harsh and horrible, then all the other stuff is easy. Oh, I'm having a thought about this. Oh, that's curious. I'm having a thought about this. And just that lightness, that lightness of being, that these thoughts, no matter what they are, or how horrible they are, or how nasty they sound, or it's passing. It's so what? Who cares?
Yeah, they're. It's like you were saying earlier. These blind spots are what are getting in the way of our authenticity, but they're not who we are, and it's a very different way of seeing and understanding. So thank you very much for sharing more of this. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Eric. Thank you.
And I see your hand up. And how do you say his name again? I've forgotten already.
Ivan.
Ivan, yes. Yes.
Hi there.
Hi, Ivan.
Hi, Jackie.
Hiya.
Yes, it's Ivan. Yes, yes, yes. Well, I found out that I had some blind spots too, or some invisible gorillas. That was a good metaphor, invisible gorillas. I've been married 3 times. And after my 3rd divorce, I decided I didn't want any more drama in my life. So I was convinced that drama was created by my partner, not me.
All the women are pulling faces here, Ivan.
Oh yes. And then some years back, 5, 6 years back, all of a sudden it hit me. Oh my God. I am the one creating drama. No one else. And I couldn't do anything other than laugh, laugh, laugh. And now drama is gone.
Yeah. I love that you say you laughed. Laughter's a beautiful release, just to see the innocence of how we mistreat ourselves.
Yeah. Over and over again. And knowing this about the principles isn't any guarantee that we don't.
I know.
I know. And that's also a blind spot, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because many of us, when we wake up to this experience, this insight, we go into the belief that life is going to be so much easier than. And no, I think it was Sigurd said life is a martial art.
Contact sport. It's a
Contact
contact
sport.
sport.
Yes, contact sport. And yes, it is. And yeah,
And I was just going to say that again is another one of these beautiful metaphors that reminds you that you're going to get bumped, you're going to get pushed around.
yes,
And
yes.
all of it is an opportunity to wake up and see something new.
Yeah.
So what, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't see that immediately. Sometimes it could be weeks before you see that, and it's kind of like, oh dear, I fell into the cesspit of sad thinking for the last 3 weeks, and oops, here I go again. But do you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I lost a dear friend Saturday night. He died.
Oh, sorry.
And yes, I went down the chimney, so to speak. But I'm getting up there.
Ivan, that's not a bad place. Grieving is beautiful.
No, yeah.
Grieving allows us to feel everything we're meant to feel and to remember another soul. It's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
My brother-in-law is currently in a hospice.
Okay.
And may not last the next couple of days. And my sister-in-law was trying to say everything's alright, and I'm like, but is it?
Yeah. I know.
Are you alright? You know, when it was like permission to feel.
Yeah.
Give yourself that permission to feel.
Yeah. And don't be afraid.
No. And you know, this thing about, you know, I fell down the pit, you know, but I'm coming out of it. To me, grief is kind of like, it comes in waves.
Yes.
You know, you don't expect it.
Exactly.
My father and my mother used to sing "You Are My Sunshine" to all of us when we were little. And then they sang it to our grandchildren, their grandchildren. And there used to be a little musical thing on the fridge the kids would press, and it would sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." And so I have a granddaughter and a grandson who's due in the next couple of weeks. And whenever I rock my granddaughter to sleep, I sing her that song. And as I was rocking her to sleep one day, I was singing it, and my voice completely broke. And I started crying. And I was like, whoa. And I was feeling my parents, that sadness, they weren't here. And it's okay, I can feel it still, and it's kind of like, that's love.
Exactly.
It's love.
Yeah. Yes. And that's who we are.
Who you are? Yeah, absolutely. Who you are.
I said it first.
You did, you beat me. You win tonight's prize.
Yeah. Oh, so good to see you, Jacquie.
Oh, it's lovely to see you too, Yvonne. I love you too.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, darling.
Jacquie, a comment came in from Zelda. She says, how the blind spots can not only prevent us from seeing our failings and faults, that we are also blind to see our innocence, our beauty and strength, and how we can change.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Zelda. That's absolutely true. And we don't even see our magnificence either. You know, how wonderful this journey of life is. We don't take the moments to appreciate when things are going really well. We're here for all of it.
Yeah. Are there any other comments or questions for Jacquie before we end our time together today?
I have a little bit of another thought, if it's okay. This is just something that came up about where does my blind spot begin and where does it end? And I say this because I was chatting with a friend, and the idea of me shopping in a store or buying products, I don't know where these products are from. And I don't know if people were suffering in the process of making them. And here I am buying them as if I, have the right to, and I get to use it, and it creates fun and convenience in my life. And how do I be diligent? I'll never know if someone's in a mine digging for uranium to make my electric car, and they have a shortened life because of it. Or is this just the blind spot of thinking, of worrying? Just curious.
What comes to mind for me when you speak of that is, I said earlier, the more conscious we are, the more we operate from love. The fact that you even saying these things to me shows me that you're on your journey, and you will make the appropriate choices that you need to make the difference in the world that you're meant to make, Eric. And that is your individual choice, moment by moment by moment. And you can screw yourself up thinking about all of these things and cause suffering, or you can just keep becoming more and more aware, more and more awake. If something touches you, research it, find out, listen to wisdom, do what you need to do, and then from that space make the choices. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because I think it gives me the opportunity to once again, even within Zelda's question, is to acknowledge the innocence too. That's in there too, and yet with the intention of love. I mean, what else could I or anyone else do?
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's that same thing, isn't it, that old phrase that people say all the time, if I'd known better, I would have done better. And sometimes we make the same mistake 2 or 3 times, or we do something 2 or 3 times before we see that there is another way to do it. My husband used to say to me, how many times do you need to get slapped in the face with a wet fish, Jacquie, before you realise that doesn't work that way? And there are things in my life that's what's had to happen. I've had to have hard learnings, tough learning. And in other things, it's quite easy to see. We're all different, but I know when we all come from love, we do the best that we can in each and every moment.
What a beautiful place for us to end. Thank you so very much, Jacquie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'd like to invite you to our next month's presentation as well. You can save the date now if you like. It'll be on August 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the same time we started today, wherever you may be. And Cherie Ray is going to be talking about happiness stalling out. Let's check under the hood. I like these playful titles very much.
Yeah, they're good, they're good. Thank you everybody for coming along, and thank you for your input. I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing you all and hearing you and feeling your presence. And thank you, Stephanie, for the opportunity to talk tonight.
Have a beautiful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
That's enough. Bye.